Where some saw an alien crowd of strangers, Whitman saw a great democratic vista, an endless river of people, each pursuing his or her own destiny. Where some saw the clash of races, classes, religions, and nationalities, he saw a daily sharing and reveled in the dissonant chorus of New Yorkers, calling it the glorious jam. Where some saw tumult and unrest, he felt the thrilling excitement of city life and the rising of a new kind of culture based on curiosity, fantasy, and desire.
Whitman wanted honesty, candor, like inadvertent frankness, directness, and he wanted adhesiveness or affection. And there's an element of wildness in it, wild love. He wanted to be the city of orgies is one of the names of his poems. He liked that element of the unexpected, the orgiastic, the inadvertent meeting of eyes.
He understood how sexuality was one of the keys to the excitement of a city and one of the forces that held it together. How the experience of fantasy itself was one of the central experiences of city life, that people could look at each other and imagine sleeping with each other.
He went around and looked at all the strangers and saw each one as a potential lover. You know, you felt that he was so filled with a kind of undischarged erotic energy that even lampposts could have been lovers for him, you know, or certainly ship masts, you know. And yet, you know, there's a sense in Whitman's poems of not of consummation so much as longing, a longing that keeps going out from him.
The proof of the poet, Whitman declared, is that his country absorbs him as affectionately as he has absorbed them. To bolster sales, he mailed in anonymous reviews of his own work, including one calling it the most glorious of triumphs in the known history of literature. But though he hoped his poems would take the country by storm, most readers were shocked by his unconventional style and by the frank sexuality of the poems. The book did not sell well. Yet even in the difficult times to come, Whitman would continue to hope that his countrymen would make the immense democratic promise he had once glimpsed on the streets of New York a concrete reality.
It's overpowering sometimes, Whitman's poetry. Just going over the Brooklyn Bridge and reading Brooklyn Ferry and hearing his voice talking to you. I mean, I don't want to get sentimental, but New Yorkers aren't sentimental, but it could make you cry.
Flood tide below me, I see you face to face. On the ferry boats, the hundreds and hundreds that cross, returning home, are more curious to me than you suppose. And you that shall cross from shore to shore years hence are more to me, and more in my meditations than you might suppose. It avails not. Time nor place, distance avails not. I am with you, you men and women of a generation, or ever so many generations hence. Just as you feel when you look on the river and the sky, so I felt. Just as any of you is one of a living crowd, I was one of a crowd. Just as you are refreshed by the gladness of the river and the bright flow, I was refreshed. Just as you stand and lean on the rail, yet hurry with the swift current, I stood, yet was hurried. Just as you look on the numberless masts of ships and the thick stem pipes of steamboats, I looked. These and all else were to me the same as they are to you. Walt Whitman.
In the summer of 1857, Whitman's hopes for his democratic island city were dealt a grievous blow. In the last weeks of August, 20 years of frenzied speculation on Wall Street came to a shocking end when panic swept through the financial district, precipitating the severest economic crisis in the nation's history.
September 28th, 1857. Panic is very dreadful in Wall Street. Failures are multiplying, and no one knows on whom he can depend or on what. October 10th. We seem foundering. Affairs are worse than ever today, and a period of general insolvency seems close upon us. People's faces in Wall Street look fearfully gaunt and desperate. November 10th. This financial crisis has thrown thousands of the working class out of employment and made it a difficult matter enough to maintain peace and order in the city through the winter. George Templeton Strong.
For the country's growing urban population, the panic was nothing less than a disaster. Walt Whitman estimated that in New York alone, more than 25,000 people were soon out of work, and 100,000 more facing hardship and even starvation. Hardest hit were those with the fewest resources, the immigrant poor and the city's beleaguered black population.
We're talking about a period where there's no Social Security, there's no unemployment relief, there's no Medicare or Medicaid. There is not that social safety net yet that's erected in the 20th century that helps to ease some of that. And so when you're unemployed, or when you're widowed, or when your child is in trouble with the law, you're hurt, you're injured, life is very, very tough for most people.
In the fall of 1857, as banks failed and businesses closed, and thousands of unemployed New Yorkers wandered the city streets, homeless, the state authorities, now in control of New York, embarked upon one of the greatest public works projects ever undertaken in an American city. It would be the most ambitious attempt yet to make Whitman's democratic island city a concrete reality.
Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. What do you see? Posted like silent sentinels all around the town stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men. Some leaning against the spiles, some seated in the pier heads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships. These are all landsmen, of weekdays tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks. How then to this? Are the green fields gone? Him in Melville.
There is no place within the city in which it is pleasant to walk or ride. No field for baseball or cricket. No pleasant garden where one can sit with and chat with a friend, or listen to the music of a good band. Clarence Cook.
Of all the deficiencies of the 1811 grid plan, none was more glaring by 1857 than the failure to provide enough park space for New York's overworked and overcrowded citizens. Half a century of explosive growth had transformed much of lower Manhattan into a congested wasteland of factories, warehouses, and tenements. For most New Yorkers, there was simply no escape. What few backyard spaces remained had been all but obliterated, and access to the riverfront almost completely cut off by a tangled belt of shipyards and docks.
Commerce is devouring inch by inch the coast of the island. If we would rescue any part of it for health and recreation, it must be done now. William Cullen Bryant.
Remember, in this day, people are packed pretty tight together. You've got roughly 500,000 people living south of 14th Street. Think about that, and there are no buildings really that are taller than 5 or 6 stories high. People are packed in very tight.
In 1857, as the city spiraled ever more deeply into economic gloom, New York undertook the greatest physical transformation of Manhattan since the grid. That fall, the city finished purchasing a vast tract of sparsely populated land north of town, then issued eviction notices to the 1,600 mainly black and Irish residents living on it. 2 weeks later, Mayor Fernando Wood announced a special design contest for what was called simply the Central Park. 6 months later, the winner was announced. Entry number 33, called Greensward, by Calvert Vaux and Frederick Law Olmsted. They were an unlikely choice for the job. Vaux, a respected English architect, had never designed a public park before. Olmsted, a frail and melancholy 35-year-old writer, had never designed anything at all. But both men were acutely aware what the driving commercial city was doing to its people, breeding physical congestion, social disorder, and spiritual unrest.
New Yorkers display a remarkable quickness of apprehension, along with a peculiarly hard sort of selfishness. Every day of their lives, they have seen thousands of their fellow men, have met them face to face, have brushed against them, and yet have had no experience of anything in common with them. There need to be places and times for reunions, where the rich and poor, the cultivated and the self-made, shall be attracted together and encouraged to assimilate. Frederick Law Olmsted.
The park Olmsted and Vaux now proposed would be an entirely new kind of public space, a man-made nature that would provide relief from the unrelenting commercial intensity of the city. As New Yorkers entered the park, they would leave behind the constant reminders of their differences and, it was hoped, rediscover a common humanity.